and welcome back to the Problem with Authority podcast. I am your host, Kiersten Kelley, and today I am with Delliah, a LCSW, right? LCSW?
Yeah, I'm an LCSW.
LCSW school social worker that I connected with on LinkedIn. So I'm going to have her share a little bit about herself, and then we will get into our topic today, which is the problem with the increase of suicidal ideation in children and adolescents.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to say. I've been working as a school social worker and in private practice for the past 4 years. But prior to that, I used to work as a one-to-one applied behavior analysis therapist. And I was working with kids who basically you couldn't leave them alone because of whatever reason, or maybe they just had problems with socializing. Typically, these kids had autism or some kind of developmental delay, and they needed help with navigating through different types of environments, their school environment, community, home environment. So I just helped them learn, adaptive behaviors and took data and helped them shape their behavior. Sometimes I help them with daily living skills. So fast forward, that led me into the schools, and now with children, early children in preschool all the way to middle school, but I have worked in high schools before. And then private practice, a lot of times I do work with adults because typically I'll do family therapy with children and their parents to kind of help bring that relationship closer and help them understand how to communicate with each other.
Yeah, because a lot of the times it's not the kids, it's the family and the parents that need the help too.
Yep.
Well, that's amazing. And thank you so much for coming on and talking with me about this. And it was so nice, our conversation we had on the phone a few weeks ago, because I'm new to school social work and it's been pretty hectic. So it was nice to talk to another school social worker about the struggles that we're having, and specifically with this topic, the increase of suicidal ideation and what it is, what we can do, and how we can move forward to make sure that everybody just has more tools in their belt to with prevention and intervention. All right, so let's get into it. So what is suicidal ideation? So my definition is when you're having thoughts of killing yourself or hurting yourself. Is that what you would say?
Yeah. And I like to think of suicidal ideation as like when you're emotionally bankrupt and you're looking for a bailout, A lot of times suicidal ideation sometimes can be lower on the scale as far as like severity, and sometimes it can be higher on the scale of severity. It just depends on if that person has really been contemplating and planning to commit suicide versus, oh, you know what, I've used all my resources, I'm bankrupt, and I need a bailout.
Exactly. And that's why when, as mental health professionals, when we are assessing a student, when they say that they're having those thoughts, we go over those things like, do you have a plan? Have you been self-harming? How long has this been going on? Has it been 3 months to a year? Have you ever learned coping skills? Do you know what those are? And a lot of the times what I've found is, I mean, these kids are so smart. They know, no, I've been struggling. I've asked for help. And like you said, like their bank is empty, and they don't feel that they have any other way out. And that's where we want to jump in so that we can prevent from them completing suicide, so that, of course, we don't want that to happen to our children and our babies. So Delliah has a really cool article that she found for us today to talk about like the stats about the increase. So go ahead and let us know about that.
Well, basically, in this article, they were saying that there has been an increase of suicidal ideation amongst preteens since 2012 to 2017. And interestingly enough, since the COVID-19 pandemic, 22% of suicide ideation or suicide attempts that's been coming through in hospitals has been kids between the ages of 9 and 10 years old. This article that I found is actually from Children's Health Orange County, and it was featured in USA Today.
Wow. And that's when we recently had some trainings at our At my job in school social work, specifically about suicidal ideation, what makes this so concerning is that when you're in that age group, they don't understand permanency. So they understand that they might be having these thoughts, have maybe made attempts, but they don't understand the permanency of those attempts, which is why it's so dangerous for us to be having that increase for those students or that age group.
I agree. I think mostly what happens is, see, when your brain develops and as you grow in your ability to cognitively process things, part of that development, part of that cognition is your executive functioning. And one of the elements of executive functioning is impulse control. Well, kids who are really young don't necessarily have impulse control. You see that like with little babies, like our toddlers. Think
Mhm.
about it. They have no inhibition, no impulse control. That's why they'll get on top of something and just jump down because they don't understand the consequences of it. Well,
Mm-mm.
kids who are older, preteens and teenagers, they have a more developed sense of impulse control and why we don't want to act on our impulses, because they start to be able to process the pros and cons of their decisions and what are some of the typical outcomes if you were to commit suicide, but they still haven't fully developed that frontal lobe of their brain to really be able to process, like you said, permanency of suicide.
Yeah, that is very true. And it was funny. We were at a training and they were talking about how kids don't have that, their brains aren't fully developed. And my coworker looked at me because I'm so young in the field and she was like, Kirsten's brain isn't fully developed either. And I was like, yeah, like that's very true. Like it takes a long time for that brain to be developed. And it's better when we can intervene and teach them those skills when they're young so that they can carry them on into adulthood, and be able to, like you said, make those appropriate decisions for the different feelings, thoughts, and emotions and actions that they have. Was there anything else in the article that you wanted to share?
Well, I thought it was interesting that they were saying they were seeing an increase of suicidal ideation amongst African American males
Mm-hmm.
who were preteens. And they were saying in this article that it was most likely because of having to deal with, racial discrimination
Mm-hmm.
on top of the other typical things that impact children's suicidal ideation, which is
Mm-hmm.
usually like bullying and suicide risk, family woes, I'm sorry, for
Mm-hmm.
suicide risk. So just pair, I think what it boils down to probably is self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're being discriminated against based on your race or how you look,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and then you're experiencing bullying because of that, and then also on top of experiencing that bullying, and maybe you have some family problems. And we know family problems can come in many forms. It could be your parents aren't really involved because they're working a lot. It could be poverty. It could be lack of communication in the household. It could be lack of modeling on how to deal with like racial issues, or
Mm-hmm.
not even having conversations about what racial issues are about, because I don't think as a society we really even talk about that anymore in schools.
No, no, we don't. And a lot of the time schools ignore it. And they don't help the students out that are going through things like that. And they don't have those conversations with the children that might be uh racially discriminating against the other student. I had a student like that the other day, and it's very different when you work with a school who has your back and parents that are ready to have that conversation and are ready to tackle that, versus when you have a school, a family that are like, let's just ignore it until it goes away, but then I'm counseling my student and it's impactful and it's harmful. And the two,
Mhm.
with the stigma around mental health just in boys and men in general, and boys don't cry, boys don't have emotions, and those different things, that doesn't help on top of all of those things.
Mhm. Yeah, I think communication is a big part of probably why a lot of kids commit suicide or they're thinking about committing suicide. I think our kids of this generation are just not as socialized as they were in my generation and your generation. we really didn't have all this internet stuff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think internet was just becoming a thing when I was in 8th grade. You know, we had AOL, and you know, you go in the chat room, you talk to somebody, you don't even know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it wasn't really a thing. It was just a kind of a side hobby. But most of the time that I spent with my friends when I was younger was, you know, after school, we go outside and play. So we're socializing. If there's an issue or there's a problem, you have to work that out with your friend because you're face to face with each other. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
the kids that I work with now, most of the fights are happening from something that was said in a group chat on Snapchat. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, but you know, me looking at it not just from the perspective of someone who's experienced, but just from the perspective of, you know, being a millennial and growing up just in a different time, like, but that's not real. See, I look at virtual reality, I don't see it as real. This is real for these kids because this is their social interaction.
Right, right. Which is scary. Really, really scary because we know how things can get, how somebody like it happens to me to this day. Like I'll text my partner, I'm like, "Hey, I'm good." And then he's like calling me like, "Are you okay?" Like, "What are you talking about? I just said I'm good." And he was like, "Oh, well, in my mind I read that like you weren't okay, like you know what I mean?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just chilling over here on on the other end of the phone." But people can read things the way that they want with their perception of the situation. And then,
Mhm,
like you said, that's their world. And
mhm.
to insert ourselves in that is difficult, very difficult when that's not something that a lot of us experienced.
Well, perception in itself is skewed when you can't
Mm-hmm.
even read nonverbal cues because you're not used to interacting with people.
Right.
So a facial expression that could be meaningless is suddenly meaningful for you
Mm-hmm.
because you're not used to picking up on those nonverbal cues to know that, oh, that person, they look like they're in deep thought. Instead, you know, oh, that person is staring at me. I actually did an episode on my podcast. It was a while ago. It was on season 1, talking about cognitive distortions.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the story about how, you know, I had a situation. It was like a bunch of girls who ended up getting involved, but there was these 2 girls who got into a fight because one of the girls thought that another girl was staring at her. And she said, that girl was looking at me like she wanted to fight me. And the other girl didn't even recall looking at her. So she was actually daydreaming. And I was like, so much was read into a look because that piece of perception is skewed because there's just a lack of face-to-face interaction
Mm-hmm.
regularly with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. And I'm glad we're bringing this up because our next topic was going to be what causes that suicidal ideation. So the adversity that students experience. The I mean, I think it goes into like not having that socialization because things that are minimal are now turning into very big situations that cause issues for kids. Like, and I know kids, like when we talking about fighting and having issues with peers, that affects their life because that's their world. So it can bring on those depressive symptoms, those anxious symptoms, that where we get into where they feel that they can't cope is where we get into them having those thoughts of suicide. What are some things that you do like as a school social worker when you see kids to that point? Like, and like, do you notice like them not having those coping skills and things and then teaching it? Like, how does that typically look for you?
I think I see a lot of kids who are lacking in coping skills
Mm-hmm.
because they're so dependent on the adults in the building to problem solve for them. They haven't been able to process adversity on their own and learn how to problem solve on their own. And that's what adversity does for us. It helps us problem solve. It helps us utilize the stress that we get from anxiety and turn it into something positive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that anxiety is seen as something negative. When people have anxiety, they're like, oh no, I'm not supposed to have this. I need to somehow suppress this or get rid of this. And it's like, no, actually, anxiety can be a very great thing because you either go into fight or flight mode. flight mode, you just check out. But if you can access that fight mode, that's when you go into your problem solving and you learn how to use that anxiety to say, oh, my brain is telling my body that something is wrong. Let me figure this out. I was doing this and this wasn't working. Let me try this way. Let me try that way. And then you just keep working until you figure out what will resolve your issue. But I don't think that the kids of this generation understand that. I think there's so much information out there about mental health that instead of that information normalizing experiences, it's making people automatically go into this mindset that, oh, I have a mental health issue and I need to somehow suppress this, when these are just normal experiences. Because I hear people using, it's almost like mental health conditions or diagnoses are becoming buzzwords, because people are talking about imposter syndrome and narcissism. And I'm like, you don't even really know what a narcissist is. If you get a DSM-5 and you look at the full criteria, that is not a narcissist. Right. I have this debate all the time with people. I probably shouldn't even mention it because we might end up on a tangent. But when people say, I had a coworker who is like, typical person. They like to talk about Trump or whatever. Trump is a narcissist. I say, he can't be a narcissist. And she said, why? I said, he's too interested in his kids. and she was like, he does this and he says this and he says that. I was like, listen, I'm telling you, if you look up the criteria for a narcissist, he can't be a narcissist if he's that interested in his children, and all his children are successful in their own right in some form of business. So that means that he brought them into his world and taught them and showed them things that he was doing. If he was a narcissist, he'd be jealous of his kids.
Right. He might be an ass. Like we're not like categorizing things correctly, right? But people want to go straight to that diagnosing. Like that's what it is. Like my kids, they get their diagnoses off of TikTok. They come to me, they're like, I have BPD, borderline personality disorder. I said, you're 10. Where are you getting this from? What is that? Because
you're not old enough to be diagnosed.
No. And why do you want that? That's where I always go down to. It's like, why? Is it because it makes you feel a part of a group of these people? Like what is it about? Because mental health is not fun a lot of the time, but it's becoming like trendy, I guess you would say. And people, it's not good. It's not good because we're like reducing stigma, but at the same time, we're not getting better pay for mental health workers. We're not, like the systemic change isn't really happening. We just have more people having access to information that they don't really know too much about, which can cause more issues. Like what you said, them not having those basic skills or education and understanding.
And if you're catastrophizing, if every time you do something and you feel like, oh, I'm doing something that's not right, and you're going into this mode of catastrophizing, then that's going to make you depressed. That's going to make you experience anxiety. And we know that depression and anxiety are two things that you can directly correlate with suicidal ideation.
100%. You're right. And that too, like when we talked about going down to like when they're little, when the little babies, like you said, like they don't have those coping skills in the moment, but you started talking about emotions and like how anxiousness isn't always about emotion. Well, a lot of times kids don't even know how to label their different feelings, how to work through them. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the times when kids are angry, the adult response is like, stop being angry. Or when they're crying is like, stop crying. So they don't even know how to correctly identify or work through those things on a 4-year-old level. They're not taught that. So then we get them older and they are just they can't self-regulate at all. Like they need so much, like you were saying, adult help and intervention for them to just be able to do basic interactions with people, which is scary. It's very, very scary. And then I know the other piece you mentioned while we were talking previously was like the bullying, like the in-person and the online. You want to touch a little bit more on that?
Bullying, I think it is as extreme as we're making it out to be, and it's not, because I think that by us trying to be more hands-on with the bullying, because let's face it, a lot of kids have killed themselves off of something that people were saying to them on the internet. People have killed themselves because they were just getting teased so much at school and it was becoming too much, and they were trying to get the adults involved in the building, and the adults weren't really helping the situation. So that's why we've had to take bullying more serious. A lot of schools have a zero tolerance for bullying policy. But at the same time, I think by not teaching kids that, people are going to say things about you. Because I have that conversation all the time with kids. I'm like, people are going to say things about you. It's up to you if you want to take it mean something, or if you want to take it with a grain of salt. And it's all about how you choose, what meaning you choose to assign to it. Because I was like, when I was a kid, oh my goodness, especially in the teenage years, I would hear things all the time about, this girl said this about me, and but a mutual friend would tell me. And I would just chalk it up to, I would say to the person, oh, well, girls just talk crap about each other when they're not around. That's what I would say. Because if I allowed myself to be invested in that, then I could have gone down this rabbit hole of starting to feel negative about myself. Oh, now I need to confront this person about something that they said that really it's not true. They can't prove it, because most of the time when people are bullying you, they're going to say something that's on the wall. They can't prove it, but you can't really disprove it. So it's just like, I try to tell the kids, don't think too much into what someone says about you. If you know who you are, which I get it, they're discovering who they are, but if you know who you are, then it doesn't matter what other people say about you. So I always try to start off this exercise with a lot of my students. What do you like about yourself? And the fact that they can't tell me what they like about themselves, it says a lot. But they're not doing activities to help them discover who they are or what's great about them. Most kids these days, all they do, they're just on the phone, they're watching TV, they're on YouTube, they're on TikTok, they're finding their identity through these sources versus, being involved in, some kind of sport, or, where you learn how to deal with adversity. That's the great thing. You start to learn how to deal with adversity, because you can't win every game.
No, you do. Teaching kids how to lose is a huge thing in my sessions a lot of time, because they can't deal with it. They can't. You're right.
Yeah. And I just think that kids are missing out on that socialization piece. That's what it keeps coming back to.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And that goes into allowing them to have more of that social emotional learning in schools. Because that's the thing, like, we're called for these situations in the middle of it, but there's just such a bigger picture issue that we can't put out all these fires when during instructional time, when you have groups of kids, that you're not teaching them how to be, humans and interact with each other and let them know, or have that space to explore who they are. Then we're not reading, writing, and all that it's going to go out the window. Like, that's what I see a lot of the time now. Like, there's just too much going on. These kids can't focus on academics because of them not being able to self-regulate or work within the environments that we have them in. So we can only do so much. We need a lot more help from the other professionals around us,
And I'm not going to say that per se the advice that we were given by our parents was the best advice in dealing with bullying and stuff, because that's that rhetoric about sticks and stones may break your bones. Words do hurt. Nobody gave you that validation. I'm sorry that person said that to you. That must have been really hurtful. Let's explore that and talk about that. And I think it's important to do that. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
As far as kids shouldn't worry about what people say. But after we've validated those emotions, now let's get into the perspective taking and let's understand how harmless what this person said about you is. Because, I had a middle schooler that's dealing with anxiety, and she was upset because somebody said that she smelled, that I guess they were spreading a rumor that she smelled. And I said, but it's not true. And if you smell, then everybody would know that you smell. But I said, by somebody saying that you smell, is that hurtful or is it harmless? I said, first, let's explore it. Does it feel hurtful? And she was like, yeah, it feels hurtful. But I said, in actuality, is it hurtful to you as a human being, your ability to function at school and go through your day and do your work and accomplish your goals? And she was like, no. I said, exactly, it's harmless. I was like, hurtful rumors are rumors where someone is attacking your character. Like if somebody spread a rumor saying that you were a drug addict, and then suddenly you had to go down to the principal's office and they were like, we're going to send you out for a drug test, and I don't know, you got expelled from school. Now, see, that was a hurtful rumor because they attacked your character and it impacted your ability to learn. So, it's that ability to really take perspective of things and understand if something is like you said earlier, a small problem or a big problem. And the kids, they just don't have that ability right now.
No. And I tell my kids, I'm like, you can't fight every single person that you think says something bad about you. Like, and I tell them, I'm like, look, this does not end in middle school. It doesn't end in elementary school. I deal with this all the time as an adult, but it's how I react to the situation and the value that I put on their words, because you physically can't fight it, because that's all the kids. They're going to fight everybody. If somebody disrespects me, I'm going to disrespect them. And I'm like, but that's not going to get you far, because it's usually the person that reacts is who gets in trouble. Like, because that's their world, getting in trouble, who's going to be held accountable, what's the consequence. But they'll get there one day. Middle school is hard, but I hope the work that we do with them clicks at some point.
Yeah. And I mean, high school, I think it's really tough. I don't remember taking in what people were saying about me in middle school too much. I think probably the most hurtful thing was my first real crush, and him calling me ugly one day in front of a whole bunch of people. And I waited until I got alone and I cried about it. But I don't remember like being depressed about it and ruminating about it. And it was just like, oh, I was sad in that moment, and then I let it go.
Right. It was something that you were able to work through.
Well, I don't know that I was that interested in what people were saying at that age. I was more interested in my interest. Right. I was like, oh yeah, I was a majorette and I was in marching band, and we didn't have marching band in middle school. It was like concert band. I was in concert band, and then I was looking forward to cheering tryouts. I was more focused on that kind of stuff. So that was a distraction from what people were saying. I didn't really care what people were saying.
No. And a lot of these kids, they don't have things like that. They're not doing those things. They're not. They don't have those after school activities. They don't have different things on their plate where they can explore those different parts in themselves and be in different environments. So like their school is their sole activity. So if anything like damages that, huge. But like you said, you had your other outlets. These kiddos don't. And a lot of times they don't. I mean, it's a resource issue too. Like parents not being able to get transportation, afford it, and different things like that, which we'll go into later with collective community care. But right now I wanted to move a little bit more into like that prevention and intervention aspect of the suicidal ideation. What do you think, like on an individual level and macro level, we could do to help with the prevention for these kiddos? We touched on it a little bit, but just break it down like bullet point by bullet point.
Macro level prevention, normalizing experiences and validating emotions, and talking with parents on having conversations with their children. because the parents are plugged in too, you
Yeah.
know. I saw something on TikTok, and I don't know, but there's like this music where it goes doom 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 doom, like it's like doom music.
Uh-huh.
A girl, she was like, "You're gonna take my iPad away from me? What are you gonna do, mom? Play with me?" And I was like, it's true, but it's so sad that these kids, their parents don't play with them, they don't interact with them, they don't have conversations with them, they don't really talk to them. What happened at school? And I get it. By the time you're teenagers, you ask your kids, "How was your day at school?" "Good." "What'd you do
Right.
at school?" "Mad."
Nothing.
"Nothing." And they go up to their room. But that's high school. But if
Right.
you start those conversations early, your kids might be interested in you too. Because if you show interest in them early on, then they'll reciprocate that. So I think macro level, that's what we can do to help. On a larger scale, I don't know. I just lost my train of thought. I was thinking meso. Sorry, on a meso level, that's what we can do to help. On a macro level, I think schools need to have resources readily available for parents. So just putting that information out there. I know last year I had an intern, and I was getting all these questions because we didn't have a case manager at the time about parent resources, just for like how to get your kids funding for certain therapeutic programs and what programs were available. And then, I work with kids who were a little bit higher on the spectrum and had like intellectual disabilities. So some of them need like adult programming and residential facilities. And how do you navigate the Medicare, Medicaid system? So we created a whole parent management training on that, and we delivered it virtually through a recording. And that was very helpful to a lot of parents.
Yeah.
And had all the links. And I know where I work now, I work in a public school. They have a whole department that's dedicated to that helps kids who are dealing with homelessness and getting them CTA transportation cards. So I just think letting the parents know what resources are available to them so they can navigate that. And I guess that's why we're in the schools, the social workers, so we can give them those resources.
Exactly. And be able to do that on a larger scale for the schools. Because a lot of people don't think about these things like the way that we do. Like you said, to do a recording like that for the parents to have access to it is amazing, because there's so much that parent, like, especially when it comes to the school system. Like, I know that schools and parents are not best friends a lot of the time. There's a like a stressful relationship there, because a lot of the times the only call they get home is when the kid is in trouble. They're yelling at the parent that the kid needs to be in school. Like, there's not that bridge that needs to happen. So when you do things like that and you're pushing into the communities to show that we're here for you, we have information, like, we don't just, our biggest thing isn't just the fact that like your kid is in trouble all the time, then that helps being able to spread that information and for them to trust what you're saying and what you're doing is in the best interest for you and the child. Because that's what happens a lot of the time. The parents will get to me, everybody else in the school has already yelled at the parent, they're fed up with the parent, they don't say positive things about their kid, and then I get on the phone with them and the parent is so upset, and I'm like, then I'm having to like backtrack with them and then be like, look, no, I'm really am here for you and your kid. I really am here to give you guys the resources, education, and skills needed so that you guys can thrive and be okay, All right. So that suicide intervention or suicide ideation prevention and intervention goes on those all levels, the micro, meso, and macro. So I would say that meso and macro, like the things you mentioned, definitely fall under that like collective community care, us coming together to work together to identify what the issues are and how to resolve them. And like you said, that comes with the education, that comes with parents talking to their kids, checking in with their kids, even though I know it's hard, especially in this day and age. And then on that individual level for us, I know as mental health professionals, it's a lot easier. But what's some advice that you could give to somebody who doesn't have this background of how to work with somebody with suicidal ideation?
Well, I think if you don't have the background, then you refer them to somebody that does, because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And what most people do is, "You're not suicidal, don't say that." you'll be okay.
Yeah,
And
don't do
that's
that.
the worst thing to say to somebody who is having suicidal thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
because the best and the first thing that you can do with anyone who's feeling down about themselves, which is essentially part of the problem, is
Mm-hmm.
by validating their feelings. So I would say, if you want a little tip, first validate them. I'm sorry to hear that you're feeling that way. How long have you been feeling that way? You really don't have to say much. You can just listen, because
Mm-hmm.
most people just want someone to listen to them when they're feeling not good about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say refer them to someone who does know how to work with someone with suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Validating, asking them up front, are you having these thoughts? Not beating around the bush about it. A lot of people think that if you talk about suicide, that is more likely, like increases the likelihood that that person would complete it, which isn't true. Having those open, honest, and conversations, then referring them. I 100% agree. All right, so I'm going to give a few resources, but before I do, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on today before we end?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Delliah, for coming on. She has a podcast called The Social Work Journal, where we will be talking over there about adversity, which we touched on a little bit today. So I'm glad those two topics flow. So please, please, please check her out. It really helps when you support small podcasts like ours that are social workers trying to use a new platform to spread awareness and help solve some of these problems. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline I wanted to share today for anybody that might be listening that is struggling or knows somebody who's struggling is 1-800-273-8255, where they will connect you with somebody to help you through that process of when you're struggling. They help with, it's a free hotline. They support people in distress, prevention, and crisis resources for you and your loved ones. All right. Thank you so much, Delliah. I hope we will definitely have to do this again for you to come on Problem with Authority.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. And just so you guys know, so you're not confused, on my podcast, I go by moniker Del Tom. And it's just so you don't confuse what I'm doing on the podcast with me providing you with therapeutic services. Because when people know you're LCSW, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm getting therapy through the podcast. It's like, nope, I'm not giving you therapy.
No.
But yeah, thanks for having me. And I look forward to having you on the Social Work Journal.
Yes. All right. Thank you. All right. I will see all of you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please rate, review, and share to support, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Problem with Authority Podcast, or you can follow me at Kiersten __Kelley.